Royal Guard spots a crying baby wearing a bracelet. He recognizes when he learns the truth, he can't stop crying. What you're about to read will leave you in tears. This story of love, betrayal, and sacrifice will break your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and let us know where you're reading from. The sun hung high over the palace courtyard, its golden rays dancing off the polished marble steps of the grand temple. Royal Guard. Marcus stood at attention, his posture perfect after 15 years of service. The afternoon drill was proceeding as usual, until a sound cut through the rhythmic march of boots on stone. A baby's cry. Marcus's head snapped toward the temple steps, his trained instincts instantly alert. The other guards continued their formation, but he couldn't ignore it. The crying grew louder, more desperate. He squinted against the sunlight, and there, abandoned on the pristine white steps, lay a small bundle wrapped in simple cloth. His heart raced as he broke formation. "Hold position," he commanded the other guards, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Each step toward the bundle felt heavier than the last. The baby's cries echoed off the temple walls, stirring something deep within his memory, a pain he'd buried years ago. As Marcus knelt beside the bundle, the infant's tiny fists waved in the air. It was a boy, no more than a few months old, his cheeks flushed from crying, but it was what glinted on the baby's wrist that made Marcus's blood run cold. A golden bracelet, delicately crafted with swirling patterns he knew by heart. The same bracelet he had given his own child 5 years ago. His fingers trembled as he touched the metal. It couldn't be. His son was dead. Or so he'd been told. The official report stated the child had died in his sleep, a tragedy that had torn Marcus's world apart. His wife, unable to bear the grief, had followed their son to the grave just months later. Marcus lifted the bracelet gently, turning it over. There, on the inside, were the initials he'd had engraved, E.R. Elena Rose, his beloved wife's name. The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. How could this baby be wearing his dead son's bracelet? A soft rustle drew his attention to the blanket. Tucked within its folds was a piece of parchment, the edges worn as if it had been handled many times. Marcus unfolded it with shaking fingers, his heart pounding so hard he could barely focus on the words. This baby was never meant to die. Find the truth before it's too late. The handwriting was familiar, elegant yet hurried, as if written in great haste. Marcus had seen it before in royal documents, but his mind refused to make the connection. It couldn't be. The implications were too terrible to consider. The baby had stopped crying now, his tiny fingers wrapping around Marcus's thumb with surprising strength. Those eyes, they were Elena's eyes, the same shade of deep brown that had captivated him years ago. But this child was too young to be his son. It didn't make sense. Footsteps echoed behind him, and Marcus turned to see Sarah, the queen's personal handmaid, crossing the courtyard. Her eyes fell on the baby, then the bracelet, and the color drained from her face. She stopped dead in her tracks, a basket of linens tumbling from her arms. "It can't be," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They said they'd taken care of it. They promised." Marcus rose slowly, cradling the baby against his chest. "Sarah, what do you know about this?" But before she could answer, a horn blasted from the palace towers, the signal for an emergency gathering of the royal guard. Sarah's eyes widened with terror. "They know!" she gasped. "Marcus, you must hide him, now!" The baby stirred in his arms, making a soft cooing sound that squeezed Marcus's heart. The bracelet caught the sunlight, throwing golden reflections across the temple steps. Whatever truth lay behind this impossible moment, one thing was clear. This child was in danger, and Marcus would die before he let anyone harm him. Heavy boots thundered in the distance. The queen's personal guards were approaching. Marcus had mere moments to decide, duty to the crown or duty to the truth that lay heavy in his arms, wrapped in a simple blanket and wearing an impossible bracelet. Marcus's mind raced as he scanned the courtyard. The temple's side entrance caught his eye, a servant's passage rarely used during daylight hours. Without hesitation, he pressed the baby closer to his chest and hurried toward it, his heart thundering with each step. Sarah quickly gathered her fallen linens, providing a distraction as she blocked the approaching guard's view. The narrow passage was dim and cool, smelling of old stone and burning incense. Marcus moved swiftly through the shadows, his trained footsteps silent despite his urgency. The baby remained remarkably quiet, as if sensing the need for secrecy. Those brown eyes, Elena's eyes, stared up at him with an impossible trust that made his throat tight. Finding a small alcove hidden behind a tapestry, Marcus carefully examined the bracelet again. Every detail matched his memories. The tiny rose etched beside Elena's initials. The small nick on the clasp from when he'd nervously fumbled while placing it on his newborn son's wrist. But his son would be 5 now, not the infant he held. The confusion made his head spin. "Guard Marcus!" A sharp voice echoed through the passage. "The Queen demands your presence immediately." Marcus recognized Commander Victor's voice, the head of the Queen's personal guard. He'd never trusted Victor, whose loyalty seemed reserved exclusively for the Queen rather than the crown itself. Marcus gently tucked the baby deeper into the alcove, ensuring the blanket provided warmth. "Stay quiet, little one," he whispered, though he knew the infant couldn't understand. "I'll return for you." The walk to the Queen's chambers felt like marching to execution. Each step brought new questions. If this baby wasn't his son, why did it wear his bracelet? If it was somehow connected to his son, what really happened 5 years ago? The official story of his child's death had always felt wrong. No one had allowed him to see the body, claiming it was too distressing. The Queen's antechamber was filled with her personal guards, their black uniforms a stark contrast to the ornate golden walls. Victor stood at attention, his scarred face impossible to read. But there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of satisfaction that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Leave us," the Queen commanded from her throne-like chair. The guards filed out, though Victor lingered at the door. Her Majesty, Queen Isabella, was as beautiful as she was feared. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, yet her face remained unlined despite 2 decades of rule. Those who knew her well understood that her pleasant smile often masked her deadliest intentions. "Marcus," she said softly, "my most loyal guard, tell me, what did you find on the temple steps today?" The lie came easily. "Nothing of consequence, Your Majesty. A cat was making noise near the temple." The Queen's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "Interesting. Because Sarah, my dear handmaid, tells a different story. She speaks of a baby, a very special baby." Marcus's blood ran cold. Sarah had betrayed him? But then he noticed the bruise forming on the Queen's knuckles, fresh, as if she'd recently struck someone. His mind flashed to Sarah's terrified expression in the courtyard. She hadn't betrayed him willingly. "Your Majesty, Don't," she cut him off, rising from her chair with fluid grace. "Don't insult us both with more lies. That child was never meant to survive. I gave specific orders 5 years ago. Yet somehow, Victor failed me. He assured me your son was dead." The world stopped. Marcus struggled to breathe as the Queen's words sank in. Victor had been involved in his son's death? The Queen had ordered it? But then, who was the baby he'd found? "I don't understand," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. The Queen moved closer, her silk gown whispering across the marble floor. "No, let me enlighten you, dear Marcus. Your wife, Elena, she was more than just a palace seamstress, wasn't she? She caught the king's eye. Their little indiscretion had consequences." Marcus staggered as if struck. "What are you saying?" "Your son, your precious baby boy, was never truly yours, Marcus. He was the king's bastard, a threat to my son's claim to the throne. I couldn't allow that. Elena knew too much, asked too many questions. Her tragic illness was necessary. And now, somehow, the child has returned to haunt us all." Rage and grief warred in Marcus's chest. His wife's death hadn't been from heartbreak. She'd been murdered. His son hadn't died in his sleep. He'd been stolen. But the baby in the temple, if his son was taken, not killed, then who was this infant with Elena's eyes and his son's bracelet? The Queen's next words chilled him to the bone. "Find the child, Marcus. Bring it to me. Prove your loyalty to the crown, and I might let you live long enough to learn the full truth about your family." Marcus forced himself to bow, every muscle in his body rigid with suppressed rage. "Yes, Your Majesty." The words tasted like poison on his tongue. As he backed away from the queen, his mind raced. He had to get back to the baby, now. The corridors seemed endless as he hurried through them, trying to maintain a normal pace despite his urgency. Guards and servants moved aside, responding to his nods with their usual respect. None of them knew that beneath his composed exterior, his world was shattering. Elena's face filled his thoughts, her smile, her gentle touch, the way she'd looked at their son. Had she known the truth about the baby's father? Had she died protecting that secret? A muffled sob from a nearby storage room caught his attention. Marcus paused, then quietly pushed the door open. Sarah sat huddled in the corner, her face bruised, tears streaming down her cheeks. When she saw him, she tried to scramble away. "Please," she whimpered. "I had no choice. The queen, she knew I saw you with the baby. She made me tell her." Marcus closed the door and knelt beside her. "Sarah, I need to know everything. What happened to my son 5 years ago? Who is the baby I found today?" Sarah's hands trembled as she wiped her tears. "Your son didn't die that night. The queen ordered Victor to take him away. I helped them. They threatened my family." Fresh sobs shook her body. "They gave him to a noble family in the northern provinces, far from the palace. But last month, that family was killed in a mysterious fire. Only the baby survived. The baby I found, he's not my son. He's your grandson." Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Grandson? But that's impossible. My son would be only 5. "Time magic," Sarah whispered, her voice dropping even lower. "The northern family, they weren't just nobles. They were practitioners of forbidden arts. They used time magic to aid your son, to hide him better. He grew up, fell in love, had a child of his own. But someone discovered the truth. The queen found out her plan had failed, that your son lived. She sent assassins, but they were too late. Someone had already taken the baby, your grandson, to safety." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His son had lived a full life in the span of what felt like moments to the rest of the world. Had he been happy? Had he known about his true parents? And now he was gone, murdered before Marcus could ever see him again. A commotion in the hallway snapped Marcus back to the present. Guards were shouting, their boots thundering against stone. The search for the baby had begun. "The bracelet," Sarah said urgently. "Your son kept it all these years. He wanted his own child to have this piece of his history, even if he couldn't remember why it was so important. The queen will kill your grandson just like she killed Elena, just like she killed your son. You have to protect him." Marcus squeezed Sarah's hand. "Come with me. I can help you escape too." She shook her head, a sad smile crossing her bruised face. "I'll only slow you down, but I can buy you time." She pressed something into his palm, a key. "Take the servants' tunnel behind the kitchens. It leads to the old monastery. The monks will help you." The shouting grew closer. Marcus stood, torn between his duty as a guard and the truth burning in his heart. Sarah suddenly straightened, squaring her shoulders despite her fear. "Go," she said firmly. "Save him. Let at least one piece of Elena's legacy survive." Marcus turned to leave, then paused. "Sarah, thank you for telling me the truth." "Guard Marcus!" Victor's voice boomed from nearby. "The queen wants every room searched." Sarah pushed him toward the back of the storage room, where a hidden door lay behind some old tapestries. "Hurry, and Marcus. Your son named his baby Elena after his mother. He never forgot her, even if he couldn't remember why." As Marcus slipped through the hidden door, tears blurred his vision. Elena, his grandson, was named Elena, carrying his grandmother's spirit in more than just his eyes. The pieces of the mystery were falling into place, each revelation more painful than the last. But there was no time for grief. The baby, his grandson, needed him. The hidden passage was narrow and dark, thick with dust and forgotten memories. As Marcus navigated its twisting path, he could hear the chaos erupting in the palace above. The queen's anger would be terrible when she discovered he had fled. But for the first time in 5 years, he felt truly alive. He had a purpose again, a reason to fight. He emerged into the kitchen storage cellar, the smell of fresh bread and herbs filling the air. The baby would be hungry soon. Marcus quickly grabbed a small bag, filling it with essentials: a water skin, some dried fruit, clean linens. His mind raced with the impossibility of his situation. His son had lived a lifetime in the span of 5 years, grown up, had a child of his own, only to be murdered by the same queen who had stolen him away in the first place. Footsteps overhead made him freeze. The guards were searching every room now. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath as boots thumped across the kitchen floor above. He needed to get back to the temple alcove where he'd hidden his grandson. The thought still felt surreal before the queen's men found him. A quiet voice suddenly spoke from the shadows. "Guard Marcus!" He spun around, hand instinctively reaching for his sword. A young boy, one of the kitchen servants, stood watching him. The child couldn't have been more than 12, but his eyes held a wisdom beyond his years. "Please," Marcus whispered, "I can explain." "No need," the boy interrupted, glancing nervously at the ceiling. "Prince Thomas sent me. He knows about the baby." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. The crown prince? How could he know? The boy continued in a rush. "The prince has been investigating his mother's secrets for months. He found documents about your son, about the time magic. He's the one who arranged for the baby to be brought here, where you would find him." Everything shifted again in Marcus's mind. The prince, the queen's own son, had orchestrated this. Why would he help me? "Because he's sick of the lies," the boy said simply. "The prince is waiting at the temple. He wants to help you escape." Another set of boots thundered overhead, and the boy flinched. "Hurry, use the wine cellar passage. It connects to the temple crypts." Before Marcus could thank him, the boy vanished back into the shadows. The kitchen door above creaked open, and Marcus quickly slipped into the wine cellar, ducking behind rows of dusty bottles. The key Sarah had given him glinted in the dim light. It would open the monastery gate, she'd said. But could he trust the prince? Or was this another of the queen's traps? The passage to the temple crypts was hidden behind a false wine rack. Marcus navigated the darkness by memory, his guard training serving him well. The air grew colder, heavy with the weight of ancient stone and buried secrets. His grandson would be directly above him now, hidden in that alcove, hopefully still safe. As he climbed the narrow steps leading up to the temple proper, Marcus heard voices. He drew his sword silently, pressing himself against the wall. The voices grew clearer. One of them belonged to Prince Thomas. "Must be here somewhere," the prince was saying. "Search every alcove." Marcus's blood ran cold. Had he been betrayed after all? But then he heard a baby's cry, that same cry that had started all of this, and his caution evaporated. He burst through the hidden door, sword raised, ready to fight his way to his grandson. Prince Thomas stood alone in the temple's side chamber, holding the crying baby with surprising gentleness. The prince was younger than Marcus remembered, barely 20, with none of his mother's cold beauty. When he saw Marcus, relief flooded his face. "Thank the gods," the prince breathed. "I was afraid they'd caught you." Marcus kept his sword raised. "Why are you helping us?" "Because I know what it's like to lose family to my mother's ambition," Thomas said quietly. He looked down at the baby, who had stopped crying and was now watching him with Elena's eyes. "She killed my sister too, you know. Another child who threatened her perfect plan for the succession. I was too young to stop it then. But I'm not powerless anymore." Heavy boots echoed from the main temple chamber. The prince quickly handed the baby to Marcus. "The monastery isn't safe. My mother's men are already there. Take him to the old lighthouse on the northern coast. There's a group of time mages hiding there, the same ones who helped your son. They can protect you both." "Time mages?" Marcus cradled his grandson close. "I thought they were all killed in the purges." "The queen's purges were thorough, but some escaped. They've been waiting for this moment, waiting to make things right." The prince pulled a sealed letter from his jacket. "Give them this. It proves I've renounced my claim to the throne. Without an heir, my mother's power is broken." The bootsteps grew closer. The prince drew his sword, moving toward the chamber entrance. "I'll hold them off. Go now." "They'll kill you," Marcus protested. Thomas smiled grimly. "No, they won't. I'm still the crown prince, and my mother's about to learn that even her perfect plans can unravel." He reached out and touched the baby's cheek gently. "Keep him safe. Let him grow up knowing love, not fear." The sound of running feet grew closer. Marcus clutched his grandson tighter and slipped through the hidden door behind the altar. The prince's voice rang out behind him, commanding and clear. "Stand down!" by order of the crown. The passage twisted downward, deeper beneath the temple than Marcus had ever ventured. The baby stayed remarkably quiet, one tiny hand gripping Marcus's shirt. Those eyes, Elena's eyes, watched him trustingly in the dim light. How many secrets had his wife carried to her grave? How many truths had died with his son? Suddenly, the passage ended at a solid wall. Marcus's heart sank until he noticed a faint breeze. Looking up, he saw a narrow shaft of light, a drainage tunnel leading to the outer city. It would be a tight fit, but they could make it. He had just started to climb when a voice spoke from the darkness behind him. "Time has a way of coming full circle, doesn't it?" Marcus spun around. Victor emerged from the shadows, sword drawn, his scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. "5 years ago, I took one child from you. Today, I'll finish what the Queen started." "You killed my wife," Marcus growled, carefully shifting the baby to one arm while drawing his sword with the other. "You stole my son." "Elena made her own choices," Victor sneered. "Sleeping with the king, bearing his bastard. She knew the risks. And your son?" He laughed darkly. "He grew up to be just like his mother, too curious, too willing to dig up buried secrets. The fire that killed him wasn't an accident." Rage blazed through Marcus's veins. He lunged forward, blade flashing in the dim light. Victor parried, but Marcus had always been the better swordsman. They traded blows in the narrow space, steel ringing against steel. The baby started crying, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "The Queen will win," Victor panted, blocking another strike. "She always does. Even the prince's rebellion will fail. Why die for a child that isn't even truly yours?" "Because he is mine," Marcus answered, his voice steady despite his fury. "Blood doesn't matter. Love does. Elena taught me that." Victor's next attack was wild, fueled by frustration. Marcus saw his opening and took it. His blade found its mark, sliding between Victor's ribs. The commander's eyes widened in shock. "This is for Elena," Marcus whispered, "and for my son." Victor stumbled backward, blood spreading across his black uniform. "You fool," he gasped. "The Queen, she has more secrets, more power than you know. The time mages, they're not what you think." His words ended in a gurgle as he collapsed. Marcus wanted to demand answers, to understand what Victor meant about the time mages, but the baby's cries were growing louder. They had to move. The climb through the drainage tunnel was arduous. Marcus's arms burned from holding both the baby and his sword, using them to brace himself as he shuffled upward. The shaft seemed endless, but finally he emerged into the fading daylight of the outer city. They were in the tannery district, the air thick with the smell of leather and smoke, perfect for hiding. The Queen's guards rarely patrolled here. Marcus quickly wrapped his guard's cloak around the baby, trying to quiet his grandson's whimpers. "Hush now, little Elena," he murmured, using the name his son had chosen. "We're almost safe." A woman's scream pierced the evening air. Marcus ducked into a shadowy doorway as people began running through the streets. Smoke rose from the direction of the palace, and bells began tolling, not the normal evening bells, but the alarm that signaled danger to the crown. "The Queen is dead," a voice shouted. "The prince has seized the throne." Marcus's heart leaped. Had Thomas succeeded? But Victor's last words echoed in his mind. "The Queen has more secrets, more power than you know." Something felt wrong. The victory seemed too easy, too clean. As if confirming his fears, the air suddenly grew thick and heavy. The light changed, taking on a strange purple tinge. Marcus had seen this before, in the war, when time mages fought on the battlefield. But this felt different, more powerful. The baby in his arms started glowing faintly, the same purple light emanating from his skin. The bracelet on his tiny wrist vibrated, and Marcus realized with horror that it wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a time magic artifact. The world around them began to blur. People in the streets moved in strange, jerky motions, as if time itself was hiccuping. Marcus clutched his grandson closer, feeling the bracelet's power pulsing against his chest. The baby's cries had stopped, replaced by an eerie calm. "Did you really think I wouldn't have a plan for this?" The Queen's voice cut through the distorted air. She stepped out of the shadows, but something was wrong. Her appearance flickered between young and old, as if multiple versions of her were trying to exist at once. I've spent decades mastering time magic. That bracelet you gave Elena, I enchanted it myself, knowing one day it would lead me to any child of the royal bloodline. Marcus backed away, his mind reeling. You planned this from the beginning? Even before Elena and the king? Oh, you fool. The queen laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the warped time. Elena didn't seduce the king. I arranged their meeting. I needed a royal bastard, someone with the king's blood, but outside the direct line. The perfect vessel for my greatest spell. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. You used us, all of us. Elena, my son, even your own children. We were all just pieces in your game. A game I've been playing for centuries. The queen's form stabilized, settling on her younger self. Did you never wonder why I look so young? How I've ruled for so long? Time magic requires sacrifice, royal blood, innocent lives. Each death feeds my power, keeps me young. Your grandson carries the perfect combination of bloodlines. With his sacrifice, I can rule forever. The baby squirmed in Marcus's arms, the bracelet glowing brighter. The queen reached out, and Marcus felt an invisible force trying to pull his grandson away. He gripped the child tighter, his feet sliding on the cobblestones. Mother, stop! Prince Thomas appeared through the purple haze, but he too looked wrong. His face shifted between child and adult, past and present bleeding together. I've seen what you really are, the records in the ancient library, the pattern of mysterious deaths. How many children have you sacrificed? Only as many as necessary, the queen replied calmly. You were supposed to understand, Thomas. Why do you think I told you about your sister? I was grooming you to take my place, to continue my work. The time mages you think are helping you, they're mine. They've always been mine. No. Thomas drew his sword, though the blade seemed to leave trails in the air as he moved. I found the truth. The real time mages, the ones you haven't corrupted, they showed me what you did to their order, how you twisted their sacred magic into something dark. Marcus felt the baby's bracelet grow hot. The purple light had spread, creating a dome around them. Outside, he could see people frozen in mid-motion, caught between moments. The queen's power was growing stronger. The bracelet, Thomas called to Marcus. It's not just a tracking spell, it's a key. My mother bound her magic to it, thinking she could control it. But true time magic responds to love, not power. That's why she could never fully master it. The queen's beautiful face twisted with rage. Foolish boy, love is weakness. Power is the only truth. She raised her hands, and the air crackled with energy. I'll kill you all and start again. There will always be more royal children to sacrifice. But as her magic lashed out, something extraordinary happened. The baby, little Elena, reached up and touched the bracelet. Pure, golden light burst from it, pushing back the queen's purple haze. Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest, and suddenly he could see them all. Elena, his son, every moment of love they'd shared, preserved in the bracelet's magic. No! The queen screamed. What's happening? Thomas smiled, and for a moment, Marcus saw him as both the child he'd been and the king he would become. You forgot the most basic law of time magic, Mother. Love leaves marks that even time cannot erase. And the love in that bracelet, the love of a father for his child, passed down through generations. It's more powerful than all your sacrifices. The golden light from the bracelet grew stronger, forming a protective shield around Marcus, Thomas, and the baby. The queen's purple magic crashed against it like waves on a cliff, but couldn't break through. Each attack seemed to make the golden light shine brighter. Impossible, the queen snarled, her form flickering more violently now. I've spent centuries perfecting this magic. No simple trinket can defeat me. But as she spoke, cracks appeared in the air around her, fractures in time itself. Through them, Marcus caught glimpses of other moments. Elena sewing the bracelet's decorations with trembling hands, his son growing up in the northern provinces, the baby being born in a room filled with candlelight. Each memory strengthened the golden shield. Your magic is built on death, Thomas said, moving to stand beside Marcus. But true time magic is built on connections, the bonds between parents and children, the love that spans generations. That's what the original time mages understood. The queen's next attack was desperate, wild. I am your mother. Where is your love for me, your loyalty? You stopped being my mother the day you killed my sister. Thomas's voice cracked with old pain. A parent's love should protect, not destroy. Marcus taught me that, even though he didn't know it. I watched him mourn Elena and his son for 5 years, saw how he kept their memory alive. That's real love and real power. The baby reached out toward the queen, and the bracelet flared like a small sun. In that brilliant light, Marcus saw her true form, ancient, withered, held together only by stolen time and sacrificed lives. Her perfect beauty melted away, revealing the monster beneath. "No, no, no!" she screamed. The cracks in time spread further, spinning out from her like a spider's web. "I won't be defeated by love. Love is nothing. Power is everything." But even as she raged, her own magic was turning against her. The purple haze began to swirl around her like a whirlpool, pulling at her form. Each life she had stolen, each year she had taken, was being torn away. "Mother," Thomas said softly, "let go. End this. Never." The queen raised her hands for one final spell, dark energy crackling between her fingers. "If I must die, I'll take you all with me." Time itself seemed to hold its breath. The queen's power gathered, building to an explosion that would shatter reality. Marcus looked down at his grandson, saw Elena's eyes looking back at him, filled with trust and innocence. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. "Elena," he whispered to the baby, "your father named you well. You carry not just a name, but a legacy of love." He touched the bracelet gently. "Let me add my love to it." The golden light surged as Marcus poured every memory, every moment of love he'd ever felt, into the bracelet. Elena's smile on their wedding day, the joy of holding his son for the first time, the pride of watching Thomas grow from a lonely prince into a good man. Even the pain of loss, because that pain proved how deep the love had been. The queen's final attack launched just as the bracelet's power reached its peak. The two forces met in an explosion of light and shadow. For a heartbeat, Marcus felt time stretched like a rubber band, showing him everything at once, past, present, future, all the might-have-beens and could-be's. He saw Elena safe and happy in another timeline. He saw his son growing up under his care. He saw Thomas becoming the king he was meant to be. He saw his grandson living a life filled with love, not fear. All these possibilities swirled around them like leaves in a storm. Then reality snapped back into focus. The queen's scream cut off as her form began to crumble, decades of stolen time escaping like sand from a broken hourglass. The purple haze evaporated, leaving only the golden light of the bracelet. "Father," she whispered, and for the first time in centuries, she sounded human. Her eyes fixed on Thomas with something like regret. "I forgot what it felt like to love." Then she was gone, dissolved into motes of light that drifted away on the evening breeze. The cracks in time sealed themselves, reality settling back into its proper shape. The people in the streets unfroze, looking around in confusion as if waking from a strange dream. Marcus swayed on his feet, exhausted from channeling so much power through the bracelet. The baby, his grandson, reached up to touch his face with tiny fingers, as if checking that he was all right. Those familiar brown eyes, Elena's eyes, were bright with innocent concern. "Here," Thomas said gently, supporting Marcus's arm. "Let's get you both somewhere safe." They made their way through the confused crowds to a small chapel near the city walls. Inside, candles flickered in the growing darkness, and the air smelled of incense and old stone. A group of robed figures emerged from the shadows, the true time mages, their faces lined with age earned naturally, not stolen through dark magic. "The queen's power is broken," the eldest mage said, her white hair glowing in the candlelight. "But there is much healing needed. The damage she did to time itself will take generations to repair." "What about the people she killed?" Marcus asked, thinking of his son, of Elena. "Can they be brought back?" The old woman's eyes filled with sympathy. "Time magic cannot truly restore what is lost, but sometimes it can offer a different kind of healing." She gestured to one of the younger mages, who stepped forward holding a familiar object. "Elena's sewing box?" "We found this in the queen's secret chambers," the young mage explained. "She kept trophies from all her victims. But this one, it contains something special." With trembling hands, Marcus opened the box. Inside lay a bundle of letters, their edges worn with age. He recognized Elena's handwriting immediately. "She wrote these while carrying your son," the old mage said softly. "One for each month, telling him about his true parents, about your love. When the queen took him, these letters went with him. He grew up reading them, knowing he was loved, even if he couldn't remember why." Tears blurred Marcus's vision as he read the first letter. "My dearest child, I don't know what the future holds, but I want you to know you were born from love, pure and true. Your father, Marcus, is the best man I've ever known." The baby squirmed in his arms, reaching for the letters as if drawn to his father's last connection to his grandmother. The bracelet glowed softly, responding to the love preserved in Elena's words. "There's more," Thomas said, producing a leather-bound journal from his cloak. "My mother kept records of everyone she used for her magic, including your son's life in the northern provinces. He was happy, Marcus. He became a scholar, fell in love, had a family of his own. He named his son Elena because the letters made him feel close to a mother he couldn't quite remember." Marcus held his grandson closer, overwhelmed by grief and joy tangled together. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to Thomas, to Elena, or to his lost son. The old mage stepped forward again. "The bracelet still holds great power, pure time magic, cleansed of the queen's corruption. What would you do with it?" Marcus looked down at his grandson, thinking of all the possibilities. He could try to change the past, save Elena and his son. But Elena's letters reminded him that love wasn't about holding on too tight. It was about letting go with grace, about carrying memories forward into new beginnings. The bracelet stays with him, Marcus decided, not for its power, but for its meaning. So he'll always know he's part of a story bigger than himself. A story about love that survived even when time itself was twisted. Thomas nodded approvingly. The time mages can teach him to use its power properly when he's older, not to change the past, but to protect the future. "And you?" Marcus asked. "What will you do now?" "Rebuild," Thomas said simply. "Make the kingdom what it should have been all along. The people deserve a ruler who understands that power without love is meaningless." He smiled sadly. "I learned that from watching you, you know? All those years of quiet grief, but you never let it make you cruel." The baby yawned, tiny fingers still clutching one of Elena's letters. The bracelet's glow had faded to a gentle shimmer, like starlight caught in gold. Outside, the evening bells began to toll, normal bells this time, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. "You should both rest," the old mage said. "Time magic leaves echoes. Dreams tonight will be significant." As if in response, the baby's eyes drifted closed. Marcus settled into a chair near the chapel's window, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. He thought of Elena, of their son, of all the love that had somehow found its way back to him in the form of this tiny grandson. That night, as the old mage had predicted, the dreams came. But they weren't the usual nightmares of loss and grief that had haunted Marcus for 5 years. Instead, he found himself walking through memories made gentle by time and understanding. He saw Elena in their small garden, singing as she sewed decorations onto the bracelet. "It's not just golden thread," she told him in the dream. "It's a promise. That love will always find its way home." Now he understood. She had known something was coming, had prepared this one last gift of protection for their child. He saw his son growing up in the northern provinces, reading Elena's letters by candlelight, the bracelet gleaming on his bedside table. The boy had his mother's eyes and his father's determination. He grew into a man who searched for truth in ancient books, who fell in love with a merchant's daughter, who cradled his own son with the same gentle care Marcus had once shown him. The dreams shifted, showing him glimpses of what his son had discovered in his research. The queen's dark pattern of stolen children, of lives cut short to fuel her immortality. But also hope, the true time mages working in secret, preserving the pure magic that flowed from love and memory, not death and power. Marcus woke to early morning light streaming through the chapel windows. His grandson was already awake, watching him with those familiar brown eyes. The baby didn't cry or fuss, just reached out with complete trust, knowing he was safe and loved. "The dreams have shown you much," the old mage said, appearing silently beside his chair. But there is one more truth you need to see. She placed her weathered hand on the bracelet, and golden light filled the chapel. Suddenly, Marcus was seeing through time itself, watching a scene unfold from just weeks ago. His son, a man now, with streaks of gray in his hair, working late in his study. The Queen's assassins approaching in the darkness. But his son wasn't surprised by their arrival. "I've been expecting you," he told them calmly, the bracelet glowing on his wrist. "My father's love protected me all these years, helped me understand what I had to do." He smiled, Elena's smile. "My son will finish what I've started." The assassin's fire consumed the house, but not before his son had used the bracelet's power one last time, sending his own child back through time, back to the one person he knew would protect him at any cost. He chose this, the old mage said gently as the vision faded. He chose to close the circle, to ensure the Queen's power would finally be broken. His sacrifice made today's victory possible. Marcus looked down at his grandson, understanding at last. He sent him to me because he knew that love would recognize love, even across time. "Yes," the mage nodded, "and now you have a choice to make. The bracelet's power could send the child forward again, to the time he came from. Or ... "No," Marcus said firmly. "My son chose this path. He wanted his child to grow up in a world free from the Queen's shadow. We honor his choice by moving forward, not back." Thomas entered the chapel, his steps quiet on the stone floor. He looked different now, more king than prince, though his eyes were kind. "The city is waking up," he said. "People remember fragments of what happened, but like a dream. They know things have changed, even if they don't understand how." "What will you tell them?" Marcus asked. "The truth, or part of it? That my mother's reign of secrets is over, that it's time for healing, for bringing what was hidden into the light." Thomas knelt beside Marcus's chair, gently touching the baby's hand. "And that love is no longer forbidden in this kingdom." The old mage smiled. "The time mages will help where we can. Some wounds need more than mortal medicine to heal, but the worst of the damage, the tears and time itself, are mending. The Queen's death released all the years she had stolen. Time is flowing naturally again." Marcus felt it too, a lightness in the air, as if the world itself was breathing easier. The weight of grief he'd carried for 5 years was changing, becoming something different, not gone, but transformed into a kind of strength, a foundation for building something new. "What will you do now?" Thomas asked softly. Marcus looked at his grandson, at Elena's eyes bright with trust and possibility. The bracelet glowed softly, no longer a tool of power, but a reminder of love's endurance. "Live," he said simply. "Teach him about his family, about the love that saved him. Help him understand his heritage, both the magic and the memories." Years passed, as they always do, but now time flowed naturally, healing old wounds and nurturing new beginnings. The kingdom flourished under Thomas's rule, who never forgot the lessons learned in that chapel. The palace gates stayed open, and love was no longer seen as weakness, but as the source of true strength. Marcus raised his grandson in a small house near the temple, where the time mages could watch over the child's growing powers. Young Elena, for Marcus kept the name his son had chosen, grew into a curious, kind-hearted boy who loved hearing stories about his family. On Elena's 5th birthday, the age Marcus's son had been when he was taken, they sat together in their garden, much like the one where Elena's grandmother had once sewn magic into gold. The bracelet, now sized to fit the boy's growing wrist, caught the morning light. "Tell me about them again," Elena asked, as he often did. "Tell me about grandmother and father and how love saved us all." Marcus gathered his grandson close, feeling the familiar warmth of the bracelet's magic, pure now, untainted by darkness. "Your grandmother Elena was the bravest person I ever knew," he began. "She understood something that even the most powerful mages sometimes forget, that love leaves marks in time itself, marks that no evil can erase." As he told the story, magic sparkled in the air around them, not the corrupted purple haze of the Queen's power, but golden light that danced like dust motes in sunshine. Elena had inherited more than just his grandmother's eyes and his father's courage. He had a natural gift for time magic, but one rooted in joy and compassion, not greed. The boy could summon echoes of the past, little glimpses of memory that shimmered in the air. Sometimes they saw Elena sewing, her fingers moving gracefully as she worked love into every stitch. Sometimes they caught fragments of his father's life, moments of discovery in his study, quiet evenings reading his mother's letters, the proud joy on his face when he first held his son. These weren't the dangerous manipulations of time that the queen had practiced, but gentle remembrances, ways of keeping love alive across the years. The time mages called Elena a bridge, someone who could help others find healing by connecting them to precious memories without getting lost in the past. On quiet evenings, Thomas would visit them, no longer wearing his crown, but carrying the wisdom it had taught him. He became like a second father to Elena, helping the boy understand the responsibility that came with his gifts. Power without love is empty, he would say, but love without wisdom can be dangerous too. We must learn from the past without trying to change it. The old mage who had helped them in the chapel became Elena's primary teacher. She showed him how to read the flows of time, to understand its currents and eddies. Your father, she told him, knew exactly what he was doing when he sent you back. He chose hope over fear, future over past. Remember that when your power grows stronger. As Elena grew, so did his understanding of the bracelet's true nature. It wasn't just a channel for magic or a family heirloom. It was a testament to the power of choice. His grandmother had chosen to weave protection into metal and thread. His father had chosen to sacrifice everything to break the queen's power. Marcus had chosen love over duty, mercy over vengeance. And now, Elena was making his own choices, using his gifts to help others find peace with their past. People came from across the kingdom to seek his aid. Parents who had lost children, children who had lost parents, anyone carrying grief too heavy to bear alone. With the bracelet's gentle magic, he could show them moments of joy frozen in time, reminding them that love never truly dies. On the 10th anniversary of the queen's defeat, Marcus stood in the temple courtyard where this story had begun. Elena, now a teenager on the cusp of manhood, stood beside him. They watched the sun rise over the city, its light catching the bracelet's gleam. "Grandfather," Elena said softly, "do you ever wish you could change what happened? Save them all?" Marcus touched the bracelet gently, feeling the familiar warmth of generations of love. "They are saved," he answered. "Not in the way I once hoped, but in the way they chose. Your grandmother's love protected your father. Your father's love saved you. And you're helping save others every day, not by changing their past, but by showing them how to carry their love forward." Elena nodded, understanding in those familiar brown eyes. Above them, the temple bells began to toll, no longer signals of danger or markers of rigid time, but joyful reminders that every moment was precious, every love worth remembering. "The story isn't over," Marcus said, pulling his grandson close. "It never really is. Love leaves its mark on time itself, and time carries love forward, always forward, into new beginnings." The bracelet glowed softly, a promise kept, a circle completed, a love that had finally found its way home.